Hi everyone, I'm Erin Thompson of Everyday Expressions and the owner of My Pretty Things. Whether you're heat embossing or just stamping, I know that getting the perfectly stamped sentiment can be a little tricky. So I wanted to share some tips with you today. I think the best place to begin is with really good paper and ink. So whether you're using a solid core cardstock or a bright white heavy cardstock, I think the smoother you can find, the better. Also, using the right inks. I prefer a pigment ink or a hybrid ink, such as a pigment ink would be or hybrid would be VersaFine Clair or VersaFine or something like the Altenew Obsidian. I think make the best stamped sentiment. It seems to be a little bit more crisp than a water-based dye ink. The next important tool is a stamp positioner, and I love my Misty. And if you've never used a stamp positioner before, it is life-changing and definitely worth the investment. So I like to use my Misty with, when you use a stamp positioner, you will find that they have a cushion foam. At least the Misty does. I take that back. Not all stamp positioners are created the same. I will tell you, I prefer a stamp positioner. I have used many. And I prefer the stamp positioners that have a cushioned like silicone mat, such as the Altenew stamp wheel, or the Misty that has a foam mat. However, I will say that I prefer to use my Misty for stamped sentiments with that little, you see that plastic kind of sticky grid in there. I like it because it's sticky, but also it doesn't allow too much squish in the foam pad. And I will tell you, I have practiced and I kept getting kind of a squishy sentiment, and those pretty fine lines on that sentiment stamp were not showing. They were squishing out. And I realized it was because I was using my Misty without that sticky grid in there. And because it's a little, provides a little bit of firmness, but yet still has a little bit of give with the foam under it, it gave me the perfect stamp. Now, another important tip to remember is how you clean your sentiments. Do not use a microfiber towel. Don't use a paper towel. I try not to use anything else other than a stamp chamois. When you use something else, even if you don't see it, it may leave fine microfibers on your stamp after cleaning, and you will find that it will cause little lines and look like kind of a little hairs on your stamped image. So never use anything except for a stamp chamois. There several companies have those out there, and so mine is from scrapbook.com. And so I love that, and I have definitely don't use a baby wipe, nothing like that. So I apologize. I am a little off on what you're seeing on the screen, and I'm a little behind in explaining things. But another important tool that I pulled out is something that you may have in your stash. It's that little grid that fits right over an A2 size panel, and it's acetate. And I put it in my Misty, and it wouldn't really tape down very well because of my sticky mat is not that sticky. And so I use the bar magnet, and it allows me to place that over my A2 size panel and do a practice stamp without going through lots of paper. And it also allows me to align that stamp, especially important for the inside of cards. It's not like a die cut that I can position and make sure I get it straight. You get a one shot to stamp an inside sentiment. And so I use that to help me position it and get it straight and aligned right in the center of my panel. I like to use a lighter weight paper for the inside, and then kind of trim that down and tape it or adhere it inside my card. And that way I also ensure that I don't make a mistake on a card that I've already finished and worked so hard on. And so I will use a layering weight paper of like 65 pounds and trim it down. So I think the most important tip I have for getting the perfect stamp sentiment is to take your time and actually stamp it 2, 3, maybe even 4 times. And the reason I say that is because each time I really try to very lightly push. I am not using a heavy push that squishes out that stamp. I am just moving my fingers around. I'm not using one of those Chucky tools or something that pushes down hard. When you're using a fine line detailed sentiment stamp, it is very important that you use very little pressure. I guess a good way to explain it is that you are just kissing the stamp, the inked stamp to the paper each time. And then and this is why it's important to use the stamp positioner. And then as you open it up, if you see some places that you've missed, maybe you close it up again and you very gently push in those specific areas. But by inking 2, 3, even 4 times, you will find that you'll get the perfectly stamped image every time. And it's so worth the effort. Let's move on and talk about heat embossing. I absolutely love to use Wow embossing powder on my sentiments. If you use the polished silver, polished gold, it gives a beautiful, very fine detailed raised image, and I love it. It is stunning. And so when you heat emboss, make sure you use your anti-static tool, and you take once again, I will re-ink with the embossing ink 2, 3, 4 times again, just to make sure it's very well inked and I get all the embossing powder adhering to that stamped image. And then take your time. I normally start heating from the back to get that base melted, and then I'll switch to the front. And once again, you're going to see right here these beautiful sentiments. I love them. And a quick note on this one is I use the VersaFine Clair ink in red. And because that's a pigment ink, all I did was cover that with the Wow Clear Gloss embossing powder. It has enough stickiness that will adhere the embossing powder. And that's how I got those beautiful images. So here are just some samples. That's a card that I did. I want to make sure I note this card is from Carol Hintermeyer on the creative team. A beautiful card. I added the stamp sentiment inside because those came after Carol had sent me that beautiful card. This one is also a Carol Hintermeyer card with that pretty sentiment inside. This is a card that I created. So pretty in a non-traditional color. This is an Andrea Shell card from the creative team. 'Tis the Season. And this is another card that I created with that small ribbon banner die sentiment on the front. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope these tips help you. And if you have any questions, don't forget to leave me a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get notified every time I have a new video. Thanks again. Bye-bye.